the escalations in the West Asia, in the Middle East. And we know that there was a negotiations in Geneva, the second round of negotiations after the 12-day war between Iran and the United States in Geneva, mediated by Omanis. And in the aftermath of that meeting, we had some sort of positive reactions. Hearing from the Vice President of the United States, then Axios reported somehow positive. The Iranian foreign minister, his assessment was somehow positive, that we are, he really said that we are preparing a detailed draft to continue the negotiations with the United States. But it seems that the escalation is happening as we talk, and we've learned from Fox News that the United States has issued an ultimatum, and it says that dismantle nuclear program or face other options. Other options, it means that the attack is coming. And on the part of Iranians and the sources inside Iran, the Iranian media in Persian, it says that Iran is preparing for war with the United States and Israel after concluding that the fundamental gaps between Iran and the United States in the negotiations are too significant for the United States to bridge. What is your understanding? Do you think that the war is coming, and how devastating that war can be?
Well, I think President Trump is really operating under a false assumption that Iran is just another, medium power like Venezuela that we can walk all over. We can go in and out and bomb them very quickly, and then they'll capitulate or be forced into some kind of surrender and capitulation on U.S. terms. That didn't happen in the first U.S. Iran war back in June. In fact, we capitulated to their terms, essentially. We said we wanted regime change. We said we wanted their nuclear program dismantled. They said they just wanted to end the fighting and keep their regime in place and their nuclear program in place. And those are the terms we agreed to, essentially, not in some kind of formal agreement, but in practice. So we did the same thing with the Houthis. We demanded the Houthis. We wanted the Houthis overthrown. We wanted Yemen liberated from the Houthis. And we wanted to see Yemen agree to stop attacking not just U.S. shipping, but international shipping as well. They counteroffer that we would, they would only agree to stop attacking U.S. shipping, and those are the terms we agreed to. So the record that the Trump administration has with regards to past conflicts with Iran and Yemen are very discouraging. In that we tend to, he tends to attack those countries. And then after, short or 7-week fights in the case of Yemen, he ends up capitulating to their terms in the realization that the maximalist terms that he's insisting on are unachievable. So I think he's going to quickly come to that conclusion. The problem is that Iran has made it clear, there's reportedly been, a Trump offer to only bomb 2 Iranian sites, let them bomb one of ours, and then we'll call it good, and have a face-saving exit from this war, which is completely unnecessary, of course, because Iran hasn't attacked the U.S., hasn't attacked Israel. We didn't attack Israel before the June war, obviously the 12-day war. Not saying that Iran's a good country. It has a Islamist regime that's very brutal, but one could say the same thing about what Israel's doing to Gaza. The Gazan civilians. That's very brutal, and they've killed many more Gazan civilians than Iran killed their protesters. But this is a conflict that I think is completely avoidable. I think that Trump is a big fan of short wars. He reportedly despises long wars, and yet he appears to be willing to risk a protracted regional war with Iran that could last many weeks, if not months, and cause thousands and perhaps even millions of U.S. and Israeli casualties.
But who's giving Donald Trump and his administration? Because we know that the Pentagon, I don't know how Pentagon is involved in that assessment on the part of the president, because president says, I'm alone in deciding if I'm going to attack or not. Where in Pentagon is that? Do you see the role of Pentagon in that decision?
No, I think Hegseth is opposed. He's reportedly was opposed to the first Iranian bombing strike, along with Vice President Vance and Tulsi Gabbard, who serves as Director of National Intelligence. So I don't think the Pentagon is the driver here. I think that Netanyahu is the primary driver. Trump seems to be marching to Netanyahu's tune. This is a war that has no U.S. national security justification, because Trump, of course, has claimed, rightly or wrongly, that Iran's nuclear program was obliterated and remains obliterated. He was just asked that a day or two ago, and said that their nuclear program doesn't really exist. We blew it up. So what's the point of negotiating? Days after that strike on Fordow and the other two Iranian nuclear sites in late June of last year, Trump was asked, so are we going to resume negotiations that, were abruptly suspended by the U.S. and Israeli bombing campaign? He said, no, there's no reason, because there's nothing left to negotiate. The nuclear programs, doesn't exist, or according to other White House sources, it was pushed back 2 years. So if indeed we have even a 2-year window before Iran has any chance of developing or weaponizing nuclear weapons, what is the need? What is the immediate need to attack Iran? And the answer is there isn't any, and that's why there's 21. This war would have 21% approval among the American people. President Trump knows that there's really nothing, no amount of lies or propaganda can propagandize the American people into supporting a war that's unjustifiable. That would be a war of aggression, again, against a regime that I view as murderous, but one that desires peace nevertheless. There's no evidence that Iran wants this war. They've been really doing everything they can to negotiate a peace deal, and I think that's commendable.
Yeah, but you've mentioned that Donald Trump hates, long wars, a war of attrition, as we see in Ukraine, for example. It seems to me that the war against Iran could literally turn into a war of attrition, because there is no way to go out and you bring down everything, because it's a country. It's not something like, as you've mentioned, Venezuela. It's different. And the whole region, looking at the whole region is so much important for the economy of the world, that how is that going to, I don't know. I don't see that in the calculation. Is your understanding headed toward that the United States is about to attack Iran? Because nobody, even in that region, the allies of the United States in the Persian Gulf, they don't agree with this war. The only country that wants this war is Israel under Netanyahu administration. And it seems that Donald Trump is doing whatever Netanyahu is asking for. And I don't know how he's gonna respond to those allies in the region, because the war would devastate the whole region. It's gonna be a regional war, not only between the United States and Iran.
Yeah, I mean, on purely political and rational, basis or reasoning, there's no way that a rational U.S. president would attack Iran, because they're going to close the Strait of Hormuz. That's going to send oil prices soaring. It's going to could cause a minor recession in the U.S. Certainly would increase the cost of living. Trump's already. His ratings are abysmal among young people here in America that are trying to buy a new house and struggling with the cost of living. We have an election in November that's going to determine control of both houses of the United States Congress. And right now, I think it's, the House is going to be totally lost through the Republicans in a blowout election, a blue wave election for the Democrats. And the Senate is just on, kind of teetering either way. And this is going to, this would ensure, in my opinion, a Democratic takeover of the United States Senate. And of course, that means that Trump is going to be impeached a third time. And this time, there's actually impeachable offenses that he's committed. Both of the other impeachments, I think, were completely bogus and partisan on the part of the Democrats. But if they wanted to impeach him on bombing Iran and starting a regional war that cost the lives of thousands of Americans, I think I would I think that's fully supportable under our Constitution as a basis for impeachment and removal. So this is it's a very dangerous proposition. There's really no upside, because he can't achieve any of his objectives. He wants to unilaterally take out their nuclear facilities. Those are hardened, buried deep underground. Not just potential nuclear warheads, but also nuclear production in terms of enriched uranium, and also thousands of missiles, including mobile IRBMs and MRBMs that are nuclear capable and that are buried under concrete silo doors. So those are not destroyable, from my opinion, other than with nuclear weapons. I don't think Trump intends to use any nuclear weapons with regards to this kind of bombing campaign. And by his own statement that the nuclear program is destroyed, it's unclear what he's going to target. My information is that is likely to principally target Iran's political leadership, perhaps even do a snatch and grab of the supreme leader himself, the Ayatollah Khomeini. And that, of course, could trigger a potential massive Iranian cyber attack against the U.S. Minimally, it would basically blow back against what Trump is trying to do by maybe enabling an IRGC takeover of the Iranian government. The IRGC, of course, controls their nuclear weapons program, their super EMP satellites, their cyber attack capabilities, and a substantial part of the Iranian military. And they're probably less, more inclined to use those weapons to devastate the United States homeland than the Islamist regime itself.
The other thing, David, would be, starting the war, it's something, but sustaining the war is much important, in my opinion. And how do you see the capabilities of sustaining a war? Because so far, what we've learned from 2 aircraft carriers, let's assume that the second one going to get to the region, and 2 aircraft carriers together with 15 destroyers and several submarines, all together going to give something like 700, 600 Tomahawk missiles. And then coming in, Israel going to be in this fight against Iran. How much do they have to sustain the war if it takes time, if it's a prolonged war?
All the other experts that I've listened to have stated that the U.S. has no more than 2 weeks of precision-guided munitions to use in high-intensity combat against the Islamic Republic of Iran in terms of bombing and airstrikes. So what happens when we run out of missiles? It's the same issue with Taiwan. We defend Taiwan against China, we'd run out of missiles probably in a week. With regards to Iran, the target set is not as difficult, but it's still, a vastly large country. It's 3 times larger than Iraq, I believe. I think it's like 75 times larger than Israel. And it has a population that's 3 to 4 times larger than what Iraq's was when we invaded it in 2003. So, I think that our ability to sustain that fight would be very, very challenged, just like it was for Israel. Israel was running out of air defense missiles, and the U.S. will run out of air defense missiles very quickly. I think we have. I was listening to Larry Johnson on your show. I think it was just yesterday, and he talked about that our Aegis destroyers, our Arleigh class destroyers, only have about 40 or 45 Aegis missiles if they have a complement of Tomahawks as well, and typically we'll fire 2 of those per incoming missile. And Iran has we don't even know how many missiles they have, but it's in the thousands. It's likely well in excess of 4, perhaps even 5 or more thousand missiles, and many of those are medium-range missiles. They have hundreds of anti-ship cruise missiles, anti-ship ballistic missiles, and hypersonic anti-ship missiles that can travel at Mach 5 or beyond. and those they would be very likely to be able to strike U.S. aircraft carriers, both the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald Ford, once it comes into the Arabian Sea or the Red Sea region by the end of the month. And as Iranian leaders have threatened, they've threatened 3,000 to 4,000 U.S. military casualties in the first couple of weeks of the war. So 4,000 to 5,000 is the crew, the size of the crew for a U.S. aircraft carrier. So that kind of implies that that's would be in their targeting menu. And we know that Communist China has provided them with precision satellite targeting data, just like we've done to Ukraine, so that they would really have a very good chance of being able to hit our carriers, that are going to have to sail much closer to Iran in order to get within a fighter strike range.
David, one of the main goals of the whole sanity, as Donald Trump tries to draw for us, which I don't believe that the problem is the nuclear program of Iran. The problem is something else with Israel. But let's assume that. How is that going to, a war with Iran, and how is that going to change the mindset of those countries who didn't go after nuclear bombs before? And do you think that would bring some sort of issue? Because Donald Trump, that he has decided to withdraw from New START treaty, or not extend the New START treaty. Let's put it this way. And everybody's, it's not just Iran, Russia, China, everybody's feeling what is happening with the nuclear program. And the United States is feeling free to attack Iran. So what do they have other countries to deter the United States or any other superpower to attack them? They're going to go after nuclear bombs, in your opinion?
Absolutely. Yeah, they absolutely are. Everything that Trump is doing is serving to encourage Iran to, deploy nuclear weapons. If they haven't done so already, before the June strikes, my assessment is that they've likely done so now, because at the time of the strikes in June, we had reports from Israel saying that they were just 15 days away from deploying nuclear warheads, atomic bombs. So if that's the case, I mean, they certainly had 450 kilograms estimated of highly enriched uranium that they could use to build up to 15 atomic bombs. So they have every reason. Trump is giving them every reason to weaponize those nukes. If he was dealing with them in a honorable, peaceful, negotiation in which he was refraining from threats of military attack, then that would incentivize Iran to suspend their nuclear weapons program, perhaps even indefinitely. And they certainly claim to do so under the Obama JCPOA. I'm not convinced that they did so, but certainly I think they curtailed their nuclear weapons activities and production activities. And we have I've laid out the terms of a deal that I think is achievable. Of course, it would have to entail that Iran be allowed to continue to produce low enriched uranium up to 3.66%, just as they were able to do under the JCPOA. But it could be done with increased verification measures. I think they could agree to get rid of their two IRBM missile classes, keep all of their MRBMs. They could have missiles that reach out up to 3,000 kilometers. Israel would be very unhappy with that, of course, because they're well within that range. But in terms of the threat to the U.S., if they were to take down their two super EMP satellites, the Nord 2 and the Nord 3, if they were to dismantle their entire space launch vehicle program and maybe have Russia and China use their space launch vehicles for any satellites they have, I think that would be a really good move. And then the U.S. could agree to withdraw our troops to the Middle East, including basically every military base but Bahrain, which is a key kind of naval base that we want to keep in the region. Of course, Diego Garcia, which is a little bit outside the Middle East. Those are two key naval bases, naval air bases we'd want to keep. But in terms of troops in Israel, we have I think up to 3,000 troops in Israel. We have 1,000 troops in Syria. I think we have about 1,500 in Iraq. All those troops need to go, and we have troops in Jordan as well. There's just no reason to keep those troops there. There hasn't been for decades. And I think they serve as more of a destabilizing force and really just targets that Iran can use, can threaten. And if we didn't have troops in the region that Iran could threaten with their medium range missiles, maybe we'd be less inclined to try to bomb and strike them.